This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Security Confidential. And this week, we are going back to our topics of cybersecurity. And I am being joined by my partner, friend, and co-founder of Dark Rhino Security, Mr. Tyler Smith.
Hi,
And
everyone.
thanks for joining us this morning, Tyler. It's a little early for us, but what the heck? We got to take.
Yes, the sun is allegedly up outside
That's right.
somewhere. Coffee isn't yet, so
Hey, I got I got hot water, not coffee.
it is too early, man. See?
It is too early, man. Because the downside, I always get hit with the downside of coffee, and I don't like that. It's inevitable. So I've
Yeah, where
switched to
you run out of
decaf.
energy. Yeah,
Yeah, it's like this.
yep.
If I have a great cup of coffee in the morning, I'm bright and awake, and then about 3 hours later, it's a steep.
Yes,
It's
yes.
like I need to find a couch and take a 10-minute power nap. So, hey, welcome back to the show. It's been a while since you were last here,
It
and we've been
has.
doing all kinds of topics on Security Confidential here. And we really want to get our audience. We want to help them individually, professionally, and also, give them some technical tips that perhaps they can apply in their own practice or give the general audience. I mean, this isn't just most of our listeners are not hardcore cybersecurity practitioners.
Mhm.
From what we've seen, they're 18 to 30-year-olds and they run the gamut. So we want to, but they do have some interest in cyber and perhaps we can make them safer. So,
Okay. Yeah. 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 So yeah,
and
I thought
you
today
were
we
going to
could
talk.
talk. Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
Um, yeah, I thought today we could talk about EDR. Some of the things that you should try to do inside of an organization, that at least that I've found that work well. I guess just starting off, like a lot of people think you can just sort of install an EDR
Well,
tool.
I'd like to pause just for a second because there's a whole bunch of people that don't know what EDR is that may be
Uh,
listening.
Good
So
point.
could you,
So yeah, so EDR, it's a catch-all phrase for endpoint detection and response tools. So
okay,
essentially, any tool that's going to protect the endpoint, or at the very least let you know when something's gone wrong with it, that being the endpoint that a user would use inside of a company, um, or even a server. Um, you deploy this tool to it, you monitor its outputs within whatever console it has, and then you respond when you see things that are concerning. So any indicators of compromise. Um,
and now there's a whole bunch of companies that do this. I mean, I think, the CrowdStrike seems to be the darling of the industry right now. Then there's Carbon Black is there. And,
mhm,
we've built our own service around a technology called Infosight.
mhm,
And I think Cylance also has
mhm.
some capability in this area. So there's a host of things there. So, but you're saying that in general, when you're deploying this, there's some things that you have to be cognizant of. It doesn't matter who you've picked as your hammer of choice.
Right, yeah, and this will change from um, company to company, but really where it becomes important are companies that are creating things like new programs or applications, or they have custom scripts that they run.
Okay.
Um, the reason is sometimes elements in those will be detected as malicious. And so if you're using a tool, and Silence was the one I kind of had in mind. Um, with Silence, you can deploy it in a monitor only mode. And a lot of companies, they get to that point and they stop. Um, and they're afraid to turn it on because they don't want to upset any of their users. And that is, it is a valid concern. You don't want people outside of your door, figuratively with torches and pitchforks,
Yeah.
calling for your head or the removal of the tool that you just deployed. So one of the strategies that's worked for me, and by no means is this my idea, it's just one that I picked up over time, is using a DevOps kind of approach to deploying the tool, whether it's Cylance, CrowdStrike, Carbon Black. It's not, as well as they've been developed and designed, to not alert on things or block things that are acceptable, and it's still going to happen. It's still going to block stuff that people are using, and unless you have a lot of time on your hands, getting to the bottom of that isn't really going to be possible. So usually what you're going to do is as those things come in, you're going to globally whitelist them, or you'll whitelist them,
Okay.
or mark them as acceptable. Excuse me.
Well, I imagine if you're a development shop, you're in the early stages of the deployment, you're going to have a lot of those, because
Yeah, I mean, it really
that is
depends on what you're developing. If it's, cut and paste kind of standard development stuff, you should be fine. But nevertheless, it really doesn't matter what you're doing as an end user inside of a company. Whenever security gets in the way of doing business, it's a very unique pain. And
yes, one that
it,
we are familiar with firsthand.
oh yeah, and there's no way you can be in security and not have this experience where someone is calling you up and they're saying, just short of being rude, some cases not short of being rude, and saying, who do you think you are, blocking my, insert whatever thing they're trying to do here. This is really inconvenient. I don't think you understand. And usually what I've found is, especially in an organization that's never experienced a large security initiative, what you'll see is you're going to catch a lot of the brunt of everything else going wrong in people's lives.
So Tyler, when you take this DevOps approach, explain that approach a little bit. So are you initially, would you deploy into an isolated environment? And forgive me, not being a cybersecurity practitioner on a day-to-day basis, I may use the wrong terminology, but
It's okay.
are you suggesting? I mean, do you first start and create an isolated environment, maybe deploy the tool in that environment, get the feedback, whitelist things that you know are going to naturally come up, and then roll it out to the masses? Or how does a DevOps approach work?
So basically the idea in a nutshell, and this is kind of my understanding, so don't freak out if you're like, that's not DevOps. It's inspired by DevOps.
Glad you said that, so that when we get hate mail in our comments, we can respond to it. But go ahead.
I really hope we don't get hate mail for this, but yeah, it's inspired by DevOps. I think the whole goal is, we're not expecting it to be a complete success immediately, and that's the key to it. We know that there's going to be problems, so what we want to do is we want to mitigate the impact of the issues as we're doing the deployment, and the way we do that is by planning ahead. So you had mentioned like an isolated system, so that's not really necessary in this instance. There are a few where you'd want to test things. A great example of that would be Okta. You want to lab the deployment of that before you try and apply it to a user environment. Otherwise, you'll get really angry emails from people.
Yeah, well, you're shutting
Um,
down access to people's systems if you mess that
yes,
up, right? So then they can't do
and
anything
mass.
in
Yes.
mass. Yeah.
So you shouldn't run into anything that terrible unless you just crank everything up to 100% and deploy your EDR solution. And so the goal is first of all, identify the different groups within the company, and you can start it as high a level as you want, and generally it's going to be based off of business units. So break it down into things like, operations, human resources, uh, um, if you have a development team, those folks, and then if you have like IT, um, break them into their own wing. And then within those, then if you need to go further, if it makes sense to go further and fragmenting those out, you can do so. But the key is not trying to take the entire company on as though everyone were doing the same thing with their machines. And that's the real key, because people who are in human resources don't use the same applications necessarily as people in finance, let's say, and they definitely don't use the same applications as people in IT. So just making those, setting it up so that you're not deploying the same agent, the same configuration to people across those different environments, because they're not using the same apps, they're not going to the same websites, they are more likely to have unique needs as far as accommodating applications that might run afoul of your EDR tool.
Let, let me ask you this. One of the statistics out there is that an advanced persistent threat, an APT, is usually in the environment 200 plus days before it is activated, right? Because any more of these bad actors, they want to exfiltrate the data first. So even if you have great backup, which companies have gotten wise about, and they can restore their systems, they're still going to release your data, and they're still going to hit you for ransom,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Unless I would love a way to set them up to just pump them full of fake data and say, go right ahead, release it, please, be my guest, you know.
Yeah. Honey,
But
yeah, the honeypot. That's
yeah, but
it's yeah.
but where I was going with this is that there's a significant probability that when you're deploying your initial EDR tool, that you might have something present in the environment. And you're saying that you have to account for exceptions. How do you actually capture that in your baseline so that that activity that might be taking, how do you find that or baseline appropriately so that at initial rollout, without locking everything down, without shutting it all down and saying we need to go process by process to make sure that the environment is clean to begin with?
Yep. So the beauty is if you're dealing with a decent tool, it should allow you to do that by design. And the way that it works is generally when you do the deployment, you're going to be monitoring. So you're not blocking, you're not taking actions like deleting files or anything drastic like that. And then again, they should have some kind of quarantine functionality, so that can be your next step. And you kind of do it in a tiered approach. So you start off with just monitoring, and you can go into the console and you can see what alerts are popping up. And then it just takes a little bit of work to really dive into those things that come up as an alert and see what they are. And so that's kind of where that goes. So some of the things, as you look at them, it'll come up as an alert. You'll open it up, you'll see what it is, do some research. You can go to if you Google hybrid analysis, there's a tool called hybrid analysis. I can't remember it right off the top of my head. I'll try and find it
Yeah.
for everybody.
Okay.
It's one of those things that you just do as you're like in the process of like ripping through stuff. So I apologize for not knowing it ahead of time, but you can take the information that you found there and go and look there. Or you can go to a program web site such as Virus Total for more information. You just hit up these different sites, and also if anybody's got any other good ones, please throw them
Share
into the
them.
comments.
Yeah.
But you just do that kind of checking on things, and it should emerge pretty quickly what's really bad and what's not bad or just a false positive. And then you can go from there and make adjustments. But most of these tools nowadays, they're very, very good at being accurate most of the time. You know, it's not like deploying a data loss prevention rule where it's, you know, you're telling it to give you all the credit card numbers it finds. That's tremendous amounts of false positives. These EDR tools are very, very accurate in detecting malicious software and processes that are previously unknown. You know, just and it's amazing how far they've come in the last 4 years. It really, really is. You know, they went from being pretty all right, you know, acceptable, but they needed a little bit of work on the front end to get them to the right place to now they are much more accurate in their detections. So, but the key is break up the company so that you can create policies specific to the different parts of the company.
Per group. Per business function.
Right. And that's the easier way to do it. You know, in the next step to that is finding user acceptance testers inside of those groups. You know, you don't need this sample should be representative of the size of the whole. So if you have 21 people, maybe that's one person per group that you identified. If you have 21,000 people, you should maybe have, you know, more than that.
Right.
Just because the likelihood across those groups, and it may even make sense to break into smaller groups than just, you know, IT, finance.
Right, but you need to have a representative sample, right?
Exactly.
That's
and the idea behind
something
that is
statistically valid.
yeah. So in the reason that you want to do that is because rather than having everyone from finance beating a path to your door because you turned on, you know, quarantining, let's say, in their silence deployment, you're just going to have one person who's really mad at you. And they understand it because you had the ability to really communicate to them and say, look, this is why we're doing this. And this is why I need your help. A lot of people are really, really, really cool about it. You know, they're willing to partner with you, especially if they realize
that
the impact
statement,
they'll have.
you know, what you said there a couple of minutes ago about, or a second ago about letting people know the why, I think is a general rule that is often neglected in our industry. Cybersecurity often gets relegated to a back office function somewhere, you know, people in a darkened room doing whatever they're doing. And the general user population doesn't have a sense of those silent guards, if you will, who are working. And I think if that came out more in the open into the light, and people and the user asset base, and I think the largest cybersecurity asset in a company are the people. If they understood the why, then they would be much more apt to cooperate, and they would be much more open to adopting the policies that the team is suggesting be adopted.
Yeah, and it's you know, and I've been doing this long enough to see it, the difference between when you're partnering with the people in the company versus being seen as like, well, you guys are forcing this on us from that. How did you put it? Like in the dark nether regions of the company, like it's
Right.
um
Often that's what cybersecurity means. People don't know. They
mhm,
don't know who, other than maybe a CISO, they don't know who's on the team, like who does what and what they're doing and how it impacts them on a day-to-day basis, unless what you're speaking of takes place when you deploy a
mhm.
tool like a new EDR platform and it stops them from doing what they are used to doing.
Then they know what you're doing
Then,
real
then
fast.
they
Yeah,
know what you're doing real quick.
you become extremely unpopular overnight. So
Once you've
partnering with,
taken that sample test, though, what happens? What would you suggest you do next in your in the pro rollout of the program?
so the reason that you want that group of users to work with is you want to be able to tailor a policy to those individuals. And depending on how deep you go, that could also include things like application control. With some EDR tools, you have the ability to turn on application control, which stops people from installing non-approved applications. And again, that would be something that would be more than likely specific to those groups that you've identified. And you're going to need their help to do that because you can't, there's no, believe me, if there was, I would have found it by now, but there's no magic wand that you can wave that just, you know, imbues you with the knowledge required to uh, configure somebody's computer correctly. And it doesn't matter what type, it doesn't matter if it's EDR or DLP or, you know,
Right.
people think you can just click your heels and like, oh yes, now I know exactly how to identify your completely proprietary information that you're trying to stop from leaving the company. Got it. Um, so it takes partnership with these people in the business units that are out there that you've identified to get these configurations set. And the other thing is you build those En-ROADs with people, and as you have other initiatives come up, you know, people will remember the positive experience that they had with you and the security team, and you'll be able to partner on other projects more easily. And that's really, you know, it's one of the unfortunate things about security is it's really easy to just be seen as the people that say no to everything. And until you make those En-ROADs and those connections, that's usually where people's conception of security stays. It's like, these are the guys that tell me I can't do stuff all the time.
Right.
So once you've gotten to a point with your user acceptance testers that things are working, you know, acceptably well, and you're going to have to figure out what that means for you. I mean, you're going to have external pressures like, when is your deadline to have this thing done, deployed, turned on everywhere? And that's going to be one example of an external pressure. Another example of external pressure would be, as you're doing this, if you find something really, really bad. And it is good to have it deployed. I like to, unless it's a massive, massive, massive environment, I like to deploy the tool everywhere if I can.
Okay.
And the only reason I wouldn't do it in a massive, massive, massive environment is because just merely deploying the tool could create issues in and of itself that you'd have to deal with that could sidetrack your ability to work with the UAT groups to develop those policies. So again, you're going to have to do that balancing act. There's really no magic way of doing it other than just figuring it out that I'm aware of. If somebody does have a great way of doing it, definitely throw that
Hit the
into the
comment.
comment. But as far as my experience goes, the next step once you've got that done is now you have like a wider UAT. If it's a really big organization, then you just expand your UAT group. by an amount that makes sense for the size of the organization. Again, if you have 21 people, probably just turn it on everywhere.
Right. But if you have 20,000, don't.
Yeah,
As you
if
said.
if you have 20,000, maybe turn it on for another 50 and then see how that goes.
Right.
And the thing is you're trying to avoid that surprise of, oh my gosh, we picked like the worst people. They don't do what 80% of the other people do in the larger group of people. And now we've just deployed it to everybody there, and things are burning down all over the place.
Right.
So and that's another part of it is keep moving the ball forward, but take little pieces instead of trying to carry the whole truckload at once. Take smaller pieces, and what you'll find is you'll be able to move faster towards a whole solution, a complete solution. And
And this
then
is a process never going to end. I'm sorry, please complete your thought, because
yeah,
I was
no,
going to.
and that is you're right. The process, that's the other thing about this, is it doesn't really ever end. Is you want to maintain that UAT group so that as updates come, you can deploy the updates to those folks first and make sure that it doesn't break stuff. And again, they do become your partner within the organization. They're helping you get a good understanding of how the actions you're going to take are going to affect the group on a larger scale. And that's the other thing is regular communication should be one of those things that you tell them, hey, listen, I'm going to reach out to you. Just know that I'm trying to get this thing done. So, I know that you have your priorities, but if you could, just when I reach out to you, I promise I won't do it all the time. But if I reach out to you about something, just please, try to get back to me, within a business day. And that way, you communicate the expectations fully. And if maybe that doesn't work for you, maybe you're like, hey, I need you really to get back to me in 30 minutes. That's fine, but communicating those expectations of what you're going to need from the UAT group is really important as well.
Okay. And is there a certain metric that you would consider using to say, all right, from our UAT groups, we have achieved X, so now we are able to go to a much broader company-wide deployment? Is there a magic metric there?
Yeah, so it's one of those things that you're going to have to sprinkle on a little bit of your own spice to, but the goal is, and what I look for is, how long between alerts am I seeing? Am I seeing an alert every 5 minutes? Um, am I seeing an alert every 5 days? And really determining based on the size of the team that you're working with, if you are, an army of one, as it were.
Right.
Maybe you want to get those user acceptance testers to a point where it's like, I'm not hearing anything for days and days and days, weeks, maybe a month before I'm going to push it out at large. But again, you have that impending external factor of, when is my deadline? Like, when do I have to have this?
Sure. I mean, everybody has deadlines. We all have deadlines, and there's and we have to be diligent about trying to meet them as best as possible. But then that's a balancing act with saying, well, what's that? That's something new I didn't know, that you're looking for that time period between alerts, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not just the alert in the EDR tool. I would imagine that if you're running a SIM, you want to account for it there.
Yeah,
As you're talking,
it applies to a lot of things. It really does.
Can you
Uh,
accelerate this process by having your threat hunting team, if you have one, inherently be a part of the deployment to begin with? Because they probably have a very good idea of what the network and
yes, you can to a degree. The problem is the unknown is the unknown that we're dealing with here is we don't know exactly how the EDR tool is going to necessarily see anything it might encounter. And that is really what you're dealing with here is you know there's a legacy application that runs every Thursday and it does this function on this old legacy server. You know, but you have to kick it off from, you know, somebody's desktop or laptop, a computer, and you know, it may be perfectly benign, but the EDR tool may look at it and go, oh my gosh, you know, it's the way that it just reserved space in your memory. It
yeah.
mimics what we know to be malicious, so we're gonna kill it. Um, you know, there's no way to really know that kind of stuff. One of the things that having a threat hunting team can help with is if you have, you know, an alert that comes up and you're not really sure about it, or you want a second set of eyes, and you can say, hey, can you guys, you know, can you spare like a malware researcher or something like that to just dive into this file that we found or this script that we had an alert on, because nobody knows what it is. Like that's really truly possible. I've run into that a lot where, you know, nobody has any idea what the script running is, or nobody has any idea what this application is, but it's on this shared endpoint that everybody in this little group of people uses.
Right.
And those are really the things that you're not necessarily trying to deal with those in your user acceptance testing. I mean, it would be great if if everybody who had some weird custom one-off piece of software in a giant company beat a path to your door and was like, here, have a look at this. It's not malicious, we made it ourselves. Or, you know, could give you that full backstory, but having the ability to deal with what's going to happen just normally, where, you know, it's going to block this, it's going to block that. In dealing with that stuff ahead of time, so then as you're going, you can deal with those one-offs as they come up. And again, the goal behind having user acceptance testers is to capture things and fix things that are likely to break across the environment within that group of users, and so you can apply controls that are appropriate for what they do, their level of risk within the organization. So
And I think that word there is key. So for as I'm hearing you describe this entire process, one thing that's becoming clear to me is that you really can't account for everything. That is not going to happen. And you are really looking at this from a risk reduction perspective. So just because you have an EDR tool doesn't mean that, oh, now somebody who is intent on getting in can't get in.
mhm,
What it's saying is that you've covered a good chunk of your bases,
yep,
right? And you've taken the risk to a point where it is below what would be for your industry that you operate in. But that does not equate to, oh, now we're completely safe. I mean, even if
mhm,
you hire the most brilliant hacking team and cybersecurity engineering team, you're not going to be 100% safe. It's impossible.
yeah, no, and that's why you know, that's why there's the R on the end of EDR. It's the response piece.
The response piece, right? And
So, and that is where your threat hunters would come in, is getting them tied into the system so that they can dig through what's coming up and um, more quickly assess, like, is this thing I'm seeing, is it really bad, or is it okay. That's where having wouldn't it be great if everybody listening to this had their own threat hunting team?
Yeah, and very few people do because they are freaking expensive.
They
So
really, really are.
you have
And there's a
to
reason
have
for that. It's truly, I mean, being a threat hunter is truly, it's an art form. There's
you're looking
some
for the
science to it, but you know, when you're talking about looking at things and being able to say, okay, where do we dive deeper next? That's kind of the, sorry, knock
no problem.
my microphone over. Sorry
That's
about that.
okay. We heard that dong. We'll edit it out.
My bad.
It's the gong show. Ding. Okay.
Ooh.
So let me ask you this, Tyler. If between so let's say I have a very minimal budget, right?
Mhm.
But I do something that is of interest to people that enough that they want to get into my environment. Am I better off investing in an EDR tool and good next generation antivirus and all these other technologies that we talk about on the prevention, detection, and response continuum, or is putting in basic IT hygiene going to yield a better reduction in risk? So keeping your systems patched all the time, uh, not clicking stupid things,
Mhm.
on
Mhm.
the web, uh, is that going to be more effective than all these technologies? And I'm curious as to what your thought on that is.
Man, that's you know, I don't think I won't call it a loaded question, but that is
It is a loaded question. It's a completely
um
loaded question now that I.
that's so I think, you know, hygiene, you know, having systems patched, you know, having trained users that they can they look at every email with a little bit of healthy suspicion. Um, you know, I think that is a must-have. You have to have that. If your systems are not patched, if
Which they
you're
rarely are in a larger corporation,
they
regardless of what the IT
yeah,
team says. I'm just calling them out on that. They're
well,
not.
it is so, and I think, you know, it's easy to say that,
It is.
but
What took
it
me 10 seconds, man?
yeah, totally, yeah, not even.
Yeah.
Here, but it's really easy to say that but it belies the true nature of what is being described in that very simple statement. And you know,
Yeah.
when you look at updating a server, there is truly a lot of intertwined complexity to that. So when
Sure.
you're
And
talking
there's
about
a number of, you got a heterogeneous environment where you've got different OSs running.
Mhm,
There's a huge amount of complexity. There's clients we have that are still running Windows XP, and they're going to be running Windows XP way into the future because a lot of the manufacturing systems that work that they use are based off of technology that runs on Windows XP, so they can't update.
yes,
Um, all right.
yes,
I
so
mean,
and
there's your proverbial right there. It's like, well, do I make product that makes me money, or do I become so secure that I can't make the product that makes me money? I mean, this is an obvious. Uh, I
that's
think I'll
yeah,
pick the one about making product to make me money because that's why everyone's in business.
exactly, exactly. And you know, I mean, in instances, I think the next step past, you know, the security hygiene stuff, I think the next thing is mitigation. So um, if that, you know, that's all fine and well to say, well, we have to use this old OS, so we're just going to do it. It's not so fine and well to just say, well, that's where it ends. Um, there are steps you can take to mitigate it. One of the things would be deploying some kind of next gen AV or EDR tool. The other things are probably already in place. So things like limiting, what can reach that device, limiting what machines are used to service those devices, and make sure that those machines are clean. Truly trying to mitigate all of your avenues of compromise, and doing so in a sense that still takes into account, okay, we've got this factory out here, it's got to run. That may be the case, but just simply going, oh, well, it's too complicated, so we're just going to leave everything wide open and everybody just do whatever they want. That's not the way to approach it. There is a way to put together a plan that, takes care of the network, takes care of the physical, takes care of, the interfaces between machines and the need for maintenance. It's not going to be simple. However, your alternative is being completely at the mercy of, chance. And let's be real, it's not really chance. I mean, there are people trying to take over systems. That's literally what they do for a job. And if you're not taking well thought out steps to protect your systems, it really, and a lot of people have this idea, well, we don't make anything, we don't have any money, we're not that, no one, why would anyone come after us? We're good people here. We're a hospital.
Yeah, well, you know what? You might be a subcontractor to somebody that does make money.
Exactly.
And if I can use your network to get into them, then yeah, you're right. You're good people. You really don't do anything. But your client, on the other hand, is a
Mhm.
wonderful target, and you have opened the doorway to them. So thank you.
Yep. And the other thing is when you're talking about the people that are doing this, I mean, they run the gamut of human experience. The people we're trying to stop from taking over systems. I know people love to use the shadowy figure in a hoodie, and
Right.
it's
Phantom,
like,
the character Phantom. Yeah.
that is, I don't like it because it ignores a lot of things about why do people, why do people get into hacking,
Money.
and well, and that is where it all comes
You know,
down
we
to.
went
But
to we were at the Recorded Future conference back when we actually used to have
conference,
conferences, and
that was like
they
5 years
had,
ago, right?
no, that was like 2 years back, and
Oh God,
in
seems a lot
Washington
longer.
D.C., and they actually had a bunch of hackers that they somehow, I should say, interviewed via text chat, right? And got them to talk a little bit about their motivations and what the groups do. And
Hmm.
by and large is they want money.
Yeah, that's what it all comes down to. There's lots of
They
reasons why,
sure, I mean,
that
us,
not becoming, business person or a doctor or an attorney.
right.
But it does all come back to that, and it is money, and and that's the thing, is like, if I go to any of these companies and I go, do you have money? You know, there's your answer. So
There's your
stop
answer.
saying, well, we're a good company, no one would hurt us, we're good people. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
okay,
right. You got
right.
money. So you're now a target, and if I can get at your money, then I'm going to take it. That's kind of the mentality of these guys, which, in some ways is a good thing because you know the devil you're dealing with to a
Mhm.
large degree. This excludes state actors, right? Because they are motivated by different things. And if you're an organization that has to deal with them, then you likely have some pretty qualified people on your team that are watching out for
Mhm.
stuff like that, right?
Yep.
But the everyday company, they got money, and and that brings to another point is one of the things that I would imagine that before you or during or at some point in the cycle of an EDR tool, you want to take great stock of your assets, like, and be very honest with yourself. And when I say an asset, it's not a computer system. When I talk about an asset, is what of yours that can I take that would actually be of some material value to you? Like, so if you're a chemical company and you've not disclosed all the spills that may have happened or events that have happened, but somehow they have been logged in some system somewhere somehow. Well, I would venture a guess that that might be worth money for you to not let that get out, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're a hospital system and the surgical notes that could result in massive settlement lawsuits on medical malpractice, um, you know, maybe some of those reports you want to make sure are properly guarded. Not because you're, and I don't mean to imply that companies are doing malicious things, but these are embarrassing. These are,
I was
I'm
gonna
bringing this
say
up for a
yeah,
reason that these are embarrassing problems, Tyler, right? These are things that can lead to embarrassment, and companies by and large don't do this kind of stuff. So, but it's an example, and it's a reason why you might want to pay out a ransom,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, yeah, and then that's a whole nother discussion.
Right,
Paying
or I
ransom.
will release your entire patient list,
Right.
right? And your patient list might be politicians and other people that are of high value, and now their medical records are out in cyberspace, right? So it might be worth it to you to pay a ransom.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So anyhow, I think take stock of your assets. That's one thing we don't see often enough, where people they they take stock of physical assets, they take stock of inventory, but you have to look at your information as an asset and be honest with yourself where that information is and how accessible that information is.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess
Yeah.
that's it. On that one, I will stop talking, because I think we've like run way past, and the editing gods are going to have to do something here.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but yeah, no, good talk, man. Thank you for
Yeah,
having
absolutely.
me. Really appreciate you having me on the show.
Hey, thank you for being here, Tyler. And we'll see everybody next time on Security Confidential. Bye.
Bye.